Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into a high-stakes intersection that honestly goes completely unnoticed, right up until it's too late. We're talking about the collision of waste management, air quality, and hidden financial risks. You know, when we think of waste, we usually just picture physical trash, right? But the reality is that the atmosphere surrounding landfills and incinerators holds these invisible threats. And these threats can trigger massive fines, community lawsuits, and just devastating financial fallout. So let's unpack it.
Here's our roadmap for it today. We'll be covering the invisible threat, communities at risk, fines and financial fallout, tracking the toxic pollutants, and finally, the technological solution.
To make sense of all this, we're grounding our entire analysis today in the industry-specific sustainability accounting standards set by SASB, which is now part of the IFRS Foundation. This framework is exactly what investors and companies use to understand sustainability-related risks and opportunities that can actually impact an entity's cash flows and cost of capital. We're going to be focusing specifically on their standards for the waste management infrastructure sector.
Section 1. The invisible threat.
What happens when our waste breathes? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? But we really need to look at the physical reality of what's being released into the atmosphere at landfills, waste incinerators, and treatment plants. We tend to view landfills as these static piles of discarded material. But as that material just sits there, it reacts, it decomposes, and it releases gases. Landfill fires, active incinerators, and chemical breakdowns all emit airborne particles. The SASB framework provides an incredibly clear definition of this. Air pollution is the presence of air contaminants in such quantities and duration that they may be injurious to humans, animals, plants, or property. And here's the real kicker. It specifically notes that it includes contaminants that interfere with the enjoyment of life. Yeah, you heard that right. This means even severe odors from standard landfill operations or waste treatment plants officially count as a major threat and a formal type of air pollution.
Section 2. Communities at risk. Because pollution doesn't just magically stop at a property line, the standard requires waste management entities to track the number of their facilities located in or near areas of dense population. And by dense population, the jurisdiction generically defines this as urbanized areas. Basically, densely developed residential or commercial areas with a population greater than 50,000 people.
But how close is too close? Under metric IFWM-128.2, if a facility's boundary, whether it's an active landfill, a closed landfill, or a waste-to-energy plant, is within 5 kilometers of these urbanized areas, well, that surrounding population is officially considered an exposed population. Think about how many neighborhoods sit just 3 miles from a waste facility. They are the ones highly likely to come into direct contact with these air emissions.
Section 3. Fines and financial fallout. Now, these ecological and human impacts directly translate into massive business risks. When toxic gases or severe odors hit those nearby communities we just talked about, it doesn't just result in a few noise complaints. According to the SASB standard, poor air quality management leads to severe regulatory exposure. This means operators face unexpected capital expenditures, significantly higher operating costs, stiff fines, and direct lawsuits from the affected communities. It hits the bottom line hard.
Section 4. Tracking the toxic pollutants.
But hey, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? Waste facilities are required to monitor 4 specific pollutants under the SASB metric IF-WM-120A.1. First, we have nitrogen oxides, reported as NOx, which excludes nitrous oxide. Then we've got sulfur oxides, or SOx. After that are non-methane volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These are carbon compounds that participate in atmospheric photochemical reactions. And finally, hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs.
Let's zoom in on that last category for a second. Hazardous air pollutants are strictly defined as pollutants known or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects, like reproductive effects or birth defects or adverse environmental effects. This really underscores the severe health stakes involved for those communities living within that 5-kilometer radius we were talking about earlier.
So, when facilities fail to manage these pollutants, they trigger non-compliance violations. The standard demands absolute transparency on everything under metric IFWM 120A3. This includes exceeding daily or monthly limits on continuous emissions, failing to manage non-continuous emissions, or even worse, submitting false reports or failing to get permits at all. And remember, an incident must be disclosed whether it resulted in a massive fine or just a formal warning letter. The regulatory net here is incredibly tight.
Section 5. The technological solution.
Fortunately, the SASB framework outlines a clear path forward for the industry to prevent these risks. Step 1 is the active management of air pollutants and odors. Step 2 is achieving this through vital technological and process improvements. And let's be clear, this isn't optional, it's absolutely necessary. By making capital investments into better technology, facilities can mitigate their regulatory exposure and avoid future compliance costs from increasingly stringent air quality regulations. Step 3 is the ultimate goal, helping entities secure and maintain their permits and fundamentally protecting their license to operate in these communities. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder today. As urban populations expand and inch closer and closer to these waste facilities, that 5-kilometer radius becomes a lot more crowded. Will technological improvements at waste facilities arrive before the next community lawsuit? Understanding the standards that measure these emissions is the critical first step, but acting on them is what will ultimately protect both the communities and the operator's bottom line. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.